I'm not thinking big enough. If our vision is strong enough, the resources, the money will all flow later.
How are you thinking about AI?
The two words I like to think of is creative struggle. What's my sense of purpose? Where's my place of belonging? And will I make a difference? Those three questions are as pertinent today as they ever have been.
Hey there. On this episode of To The Point, we are joined by a master storyteller. Rick Rekedal has spent more than 2 decades in Hollywood working on some major iconic films. Whether it's Saving Private Ryan to Shrek, Trolls to Prince of Egypt, he's done it all and has the stories to prove it. We talk about a lot on this episode, from artificial intelligence, how that's changing the creative process and landscape. We talk about storytelling a lot because Rick has mastered it. We also talk about higher education because now Rick's chief creative officer for Belmont University and is already transforming that campus and expanding the vision for how it connects to Nashville. It is a wide-ranging conversation with pearls of wisdom throughout. So no matter where you are in your career or no matter what industry you're in, you're going to get something out of this conversation. I know I did. Well, let's get to the point now and Rick. Rick, okay, we just heard your bio a little bit, but thank you so much, first and foremost, for being on the show.
Of course, yeah, it's a joy.
I know your time is valuable, and I'm so excited for this conversation because we've met before and talked a little bit about storytelling, and I don't think it's an exaggeration to say you are a master at the craft, and you've been telling stories and putting them together for decades now. Give people a little bit of your background, more than I just did.
Well, I like to say that I sat at the feet of a lot of other people. I'm a good listener. I've learned to be a good listener and kind of absorb it and put the pieces together. So I can confidently say there isn't any one project that I get associated with that I actually was running or a part of or running, in charge of, but I was a part of a lot of it. Right. And especially when you are the pebble behind the avalanche of somebody else's vision and you can say, okay, I see what you're trying to do. Let's help you maximize that impact. Let's help you understand who it's for. Let's help you understand how it's going to really land. Then it can really, maximize and thrive. That's what I get excited about. And it all, to me, it starts with story. And I've spent over 30 years now in kids and family entertainment. I was in college and I started working at a toy company. And then from there, eventually shifted over to intellectual property side, people who run and create properties. And in Hollywood, that's movie studios. Doors open for me to join DreamWorks in the very first year. And I stayed with DreamWorks for over 21 years until the studio was sold to Universal Studios. Through that time, not only did I learn a lot about the power of story, I also lived through what it was like to take a company public, lived through what it was like to find somebody to buy us. So all the different layers of what that whole world it kind of entails. It was a lifelong education while we lived through it.
No kidding. It feels like we could do almost 3, 4, 5 separate podcasts. We could just focus on the business and the stories you have around DreamWorks, or maybe an hour on IPOing in that environment. But, I heard you tell a story recently about how you got involved with the Prince of Egypt. And I feel like you have a ton of stories about how you became maybe the pebble in the avalanche. What do you attribute your success to in getting involved in projects, or people saying, hey, let's run this idea by Rick, or let's pull him in? Are you selling yourself? Is it, right place, right time? What's been kind of the...
Well, I mean, in terms of selling yourself, the answer is yes, in a sense, right? Every day's a test. For me, I'm 57 years old. I've been doing this since I was 24. Taking things one day at a time has never been less of a cliche for me in terms of learning, okay, I can come up with all the plans and think this is the logical place where this is going to go, and then we'll wake up tomorrow and see what actually is happening. The idea of the art of the pitch is what I like to call it, is that it's not really about my idea. I say the art of the pitch is the emotional science of selling your story and yourself. And I found early on, especially finally walking the hallways of DreamWorks in the early days, oh my gosh, I need to have a point of view, and sitting around this table with all these fancy people, and somehow with fully the imposter syndrome, I'm here at this table. I have to have a point of view. And the point of view I learned to have was not, I have ideas about your script or, I have ideas about how you should light that thing. That you're the creative, right? So I'm not going to try to get ahead of you. But what I hear you really wanting to do has to land in the heart of, in the case of an animated movie in the 1990s and 2000s, in the heart of an average 7-year-old kid in America and their parents. Turns out we can know a lot about the felt needs of what's going on in a nuclear family in the market we think we're trying to reach. And connecting what's going on in that family back with your vision for a story and making that bridge is where we can unleash the largest impact of your story.
I think it's really interesting when you think about making movies or understanding your audience. You can probably, research something to death. I wonder how you think about the intersection of research versus kind of lived experience, how you feel about something, your own. I had an interaction with my son, and that's going to inform this dialogue. Do you think the pendulum swings one way or another too often?
Well, okay. Gauging audience reaction is timeless. Right? Any live theater actor will tell you it really depends on the house that night. Right?
Okay.
If the house is great, then our show is better. My acting is better. Like all of those kind of things. Yeah. One of my favorite stories is Charles Dickens, who was the mogul of his day, who quit the publisher that he owed a book to and launched his own imprint and decided I could reach the masses if I start publishing my stories 3 chapters at a time in a monthly magazine that costs 2 pennies instead of waiting to publish a book that costs £5 and only the proletariat can buy it. That said, he made a habit of hiding in the bookstalls the day that the new publication came out so he could hear what people were saying to each other as they lined up to buy this month's magazine. The characters they liked, the characters they didn't like, the story points that were confusing to them. If you read a long Dickens novel, they're all long, that's redundant, you will find sometimes a character kind of starts to fade. Like, well, we kind of lost that character. Well, he's writing them out because he's listening to what's going on in the bookstalls of what the people are talking about, what was resonating with them.
And he didn't have the hubris to say, oh, no, I'm right, they're wrong, which I guess if you have too much ego or you're too not in touch with the pulse of your public, your audience, then you...
Yeah, it can sound like, oh, we're kind of like letting the focus groups drive our creativity.
Yeah.
And that's not the case at all. It just has to do with if I really feel like I have been given the story that I want to tell, and I can't yet tell you who I think it's for or where it's going to resonate, then the best we're going to do is craft a good story and throw it over the fence and hope it lands somewhere. And that is so inefficient.
Yeah.
And so it just in terms of the tools that we have now to be able to really resonate. But I also like to answer the question, who is your story for, by looking for, are you going to use a word like anybody who, or everybody that always wanted to, right? If you're using everybody or anyone, then we don't really have a clear target of who this is for.
No, that's really interesting. And I think I've heard the more targeted you are with your story, this is more kind of in Hollywood and at the, you're trying to get something off the ground to the masses. The more targeted you are and focused, actually, the more authentic it will be to the rest of the audience. Even if your niche target is 7-year-old boy or girl, in America, if you do that well, it will resonate with the family in Italy or the family in China, even if they maybe don't have that lived experience. Yeah,
that's the irony of being really focused, or that we think, oh, this is going to now be too narrow. The dinosaur science, I got a chance to work on the Lost World Jurassic Park, not the first one, Jurassic Park, but the second one. And the dinosaur science in Jurassic Park of its day was pretty darn good. Michael Crichton, of course, who wrote the original book, but also the team that came around Spielberg and, putting that whole franchise together was as good as anybody knew back in the day. And yet none of us would say that franchise is made for the children of paleontologists.
Sure.
Right? We're not making the Jurassic Park franchise just for dinosaur archaeologists and their children. And yet sometimes when you pitch a project that sounds like it's narrow, people around the table will reduce it to, I think I have a friend of mine who's interested in that idea. And then all of a sudden it turns out, you think this movie is only going to be for 1 out of 20 people? The focus is clear, but if it works well, we all want to sit at that table.
So the table that you just mentioned, how have you navigated that over your career, where there's a personality like a Jeffrey Katzenberg or somebody where everyone is tailoring their message or posturing towards one person, or everyone's taking out their shotgun and trying to, blast your idea to look smart, So there's a little bit of table setting. And then the final third point I'll make there is a lot of people ascribe to the belief that you need to make your boss think it's their idea, right? So I'm curious, in your navigating of Hollywood and DreamWorks, how did you not step on people's toes, but also get credit for your ideas?
Well, I mean, first of all, I feel like I just, not blowing smoke, I really do owe so much of my career personally to Jeffrey Katzenberg. He taught me how to think really big with a capital B, without any filters. And he would say, what's your best idea in this area? And I would have some kind of self-edited version of an idea, and I could just see his face fall. I'm like, okay, I'm not thinking big enough, right? To think without fetters. Why are you self-editing? If our vision is strong enough, the resources, the money will all flow later. And, so that classic, get out of your skis. Let's get out of over our skis enough that we really can get some momentum. I don't even know where this is going, but, I'm out over my skis and I'm going to keep going, and maybe something will come in behind me. I learned that from him, and has helped me in every situation, especially when I've, since selling DreamWorks, have worked with clients, or now I'm on the university level. That same kind of posture applies. It's so easy to be really careful and wait. And, my tendency to want to control things flies in the face of that. So I've had to learn how to let go of that tendency to want to control. Turns out not much is in my control anyway. Yeah. And in fact, let's just get out there over our skis and get going with the idea.
Yeah, I think that's really interesting, because I think the thinking big, it really sounds good on paper, but then a lot of people say, am I just going to sound ridiculous, or am I being unrealistic? And there naturally, in any room, there's a cynic, right, who will say, that's too big a vision, or that's unrealistic, or what makes you think we can achieve that? And they want to break it down to baby steps and not jump to 5 years from now, imagine a campus or imagine a studio. How do you navigate those people who clearly don't share that ability or desire to think capital B big?
Well, gatekeepers are everywhere, right? We kind of see where the silos are in the room. And I'm a big admirer of Robert Greene's 48 Laws of Power. You mentioned,
I just read that. Actually.
Concepts like, don't outshine the boss. Now, that could sound like, well, the boss is so sensitive. The classic story in that book that I have used as kind of a work Bible reference is the king who orders the master architect to build him a tower, right? And so the master architect does a great job building a tower to the king's power, but he does such a great job that, in fact, the people start to admire the architect. And so the day the tower is opened, everybody applauds, and the next day, the architect loses his head. So, let's be sure that we know kind of who we're in service to and what we're doing. And that just is good, human interaction with each other.
Yeah.
To me, the thing that helps break down some of those barriers that I found again and again, especially if there's, $1 million scriptwriter around the table, or big fancy movie directors, or, stakeholders in a different capacity. What are we all really trying to do? At the end of the day, what are we really in service to? When it came to merchandising, for instance, often in a Hollywood conversation, the merchandising people are viewed as the marketing hacks. Like, maybe you'll be able to sell some plastic action figures, you know, as if it's almost an exploitation. Andrew Stanton has a very famous quote. He's one of the old Pixar directors. Oh, I've never even been in a room with a marketing person, And then he was given $200 million to make a movie called John Carter of Mars, and hadn't really done a lot of audience research. And how'd that do for you? So what I like to say in that is, let's keep in mind who this is actually for. So getting back to the merchandising question, what I would usually end up sitting down and asking a film director with a film that might have some merchandising potential for becoming a toy line or becoming a video game is not this will be exploited later as a license, but how does the story want to go home? Once you're done with us for 2 hours and 10 minutes, and we're now leaving the theater, if I've been so moved that there's something in there that has something that I want to now start to work out in my own life, I call that the empowerment currency. And there's an empowerment currency in the story that I could pick up and start to use if you just gave me some additional tools. And so in the case of, for instance, an extended toy line, or how do you continue to play the movie into a video game, or want to read more versions of it in an ongoing comic book, carrying it into extended TV sequels, all the kind of aspects of where the hub has these spokes where the story continues. It isn't just about, they found a way to exploit those things. It's about, when it works well, there's an empowerment currency in the core idea of that story that has lit up the heart of the audience so much, in the case of a kid, that they want to continue to use it to find out who they are. And let's give them those tools.
That's a really good insight right there. And you see that. I just was listening to the Netflix CEO talk about the Stranger Things experience and how they're moving into these theme parks. And it's one of those things where, like Stranger Things, you're not taking home an action figure of, a Demogorgon or something like that. But now they're trying to find creative ways. And I don't think most people think about Hollywood or storytelling that way. They're not thinking of the layers beneath the movie or the life cycle after it. So to hear you talk about it is illuminating from just a strictly consumer perspective of all the thought, time, energy, strategy that goes into that keychain or that kid's doll.
Well, to me, that, again, reflects the power of story. Mr. Rogers talks about why play in the lives of children is so important and, frankly, so serious. Play is the work of how a child is figuring out their role in life. And when I was young in my career working in the toy industry, at first I thought, oh, this will be just a laugh. Like, this will be super fun. It's light. It's just toys. Yeah. And then I realized, oh, wait, the weight of the next generation's shoulders, right? Like, this is how a child might be figuring out how their life works. For my own experience as a little kid, I was 7 years old when my dad walked out of our house, and my mom came in tears and said, your father just left us. He said he's never coming back. And on my bedroom floor was a bunch of Matchbox cars, and I was a Smokey and the Bandit kid, and trying to kind of live out the adventures of what those characters were doing in those cars, and you try to get yourself lost in that, and it started to kind of lose its effectiveness for me as a little boy. I remember feeling like, this is kind of dumb, right? And how does a little boy make that connection between the experience that's just happened in our house and this kind of play is no longer satisfying for me.
Man.
But a friend of the family's handed me a paperback book. And it was a book about 4 little British kids who go through a wardrobe, right? And so Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe.
Yeah.
In the mid-'70s, that book wasn't exactly broadly known.
Yeah.
And in the middle of that story, I met a misfit boy, young Edmund, right, who makes every wrong choice. And at every time we know he's making the wrong choice, we also have a sense he knows he's making the wrong choice and ends up putting himself on the wrong side of all of those situations. But there's this amazing scene that grabbed me when I was 7.5 years old, when Aslan finally shows up, Aslan the lion, and takes Edmund on a walk in the woods. But we don't get to hear what they say.
That's right.
We stay with Peter and Susan and Lucy, the siblings, who are all complaining. And so the misfit kid finally gets to hear what they're saying about him, right? And all of a sudden I felt known. Now, the good news in our family story is that almost 3 years later, my dad walked back into our life. And a couple of years ago, my parents were celebrating their 50th, and I wrote my dad's story. It's a book called One Small Step, and I sent it just to him, just to thank him for being willing to take the step of sobriety in his life, that then led to a step of rediscovering his family, and then led to the step of bringing faith into our family, and everything was new from there. I won't say it was all restored as if it was over, because those scars are there.
Yeah.
Everything was new from there going forward. I'm telling you this story because, again, the power of play in that moment speaks volumes to how a young child is figuring out life. That play today doesn't go away. Disney said in the 1920s, I'm going to make stories for children and the child that's in the heart of every adult. And more than ever today, as we push off adulthood and as 28, 9, 30-year-olds, 31, 32-year-olds are still adulting, right? Not quite ready to be, right? I still have my video game night, all those things, right? That the heart of the child that lives in every one of us has never been stronger. And so what are adult versions of play where we're still trying to figure out our role in life? And what are the stories that inform those those play patterns. That to me is kind of what drives me, and frankly, why I found a lot of traction being able to take what I learned at DreamWorks, and then when I launched StoryCrate, working with corporate clients.
Yeah.
Because the same power story applies whether you're selling something or whether you're wanting to launch a campaign or having any kind of an exchange at all. It comes back to what's the story you're telling and where it's going to land.
Yeah. Man, that is so good. I mean, thank you for the vulnerability and sharing that story about your family and your dad and the play. One thing that came to mind when you first said play was my daughter. I have a 4 and a 2-year-old daughter, and we moved, 2 years ago from Phoenix out here to Northern Virginia, and we packed up my daughter's toys, and she was obsessed with Mickey. She has nicknames for all of us based on the characters we are as a family, right? So I was Goofy, and then she was Max because we watched the Goofy movie, and my wife is Pete. Gender doesn't matter in these characters,
of course
right?
not. Yeah.
And and then we have been the Trolls guys, so she's Poppy and I'm Branch, and like on and on and on. We have been a million different iterations of every movie, and we watched Prince of Egypt a couple weeks ago, and I became Moses, right? And she knows the words, right? She'll say, anyway, I share all this to say, when we moved, we boxed up our stuff. And when we moved to this new house, it's an empty house. My wife is sad because, we've moved and all these things. And we opened the box and she lit up and she goes, "My guys are home." Mm-hmm. And it was this moment, it like made my mother-in-law and my wife emotional. Me a little bit less so because I'm maybe heartless, but
well, that we knew.
Yeah, exactly. No, but it was this moment where she said home and she said "my guys," and it was this reunion of her play, and she still does it today. And you know this as a parent, as a girl dad especially. It's like you want to stop these moments because you're not going to be Goof in a couple months, but you can't stop it. You just gotta try and savor every
I can
moment.
give you the hope that it does come back.
Okay, good.
Right?
Give
So
it to
that
me.
4 and 2-year-old someday will be a 34 and a 32-year-old, and it does come back.
Okay.
That will come back around. Those nicknames may stick, by the way.
That's right. Okay, here's my next question, Rick. It's around a lot of people out there. I had a conversation recently where someone goes, "How do I get better at storytelling?" How do people get better at storytelling? Is it one of those things where, nature and nurture, kind of sorry, you're stuck with, being a data person?
Steve Martin in Planes and Automobiles, right? Have a point, right? Say something important to the listener. and this is such a powerful moment, right?
Yeah.
And we all feel for John Candy in that moment. And yet he's right. And so much, what I like to also kind of gauge in the back of my head is when somebody says they have a project for me, or they want to pitch me their concept, immediately my clock starts ticking in my head. And 3 minutes later, if they're still talking, we don't have much of a project yet.
You're saying get to the point, not to plug the podcast, but there is a level of like, you got to be incisive. You have to cut out all the extra, fluff and get me to the heart of the story quickly. And that's one of your core
so
tenets?
One pro tip is that let's not talk about the plot of the story. I'm not that interested. And by the way, nobody is. So when you're pitching your story concepts, nobody's that interested in the story itself. I have a baseball movie. Okay, great. And so this 12-year-old who goes, he's going to travel. And he and his dad fly to the Dominican Republic, and then they meet these people, and he's inspired, and then they come back. But there's a thing that happens on the flight back. I'm already lost. I'm like, why are you telling me this story? I'm sure it's fine, right? It won't be great. Let's not spend some time, any more time on the story plot or the story conceits that you've come up with. I want to know, what is it about? What does it stand for? And if you could spend some time thinking about what the story stands for, I want to tell a baseball movie that is a metaphor for coming of age for a Gen Alpha kid, post-COVID kid who is individuated before they're really able to find their own identity. And they finally find it in a baseball team. Okay. Now I know, I just made all that up. But now I know that you have a point of what your story is about. A classic example I give in film classes all the time at the college level is let's all just spend some time, tell me what Star Wars is about. And Star Wars is one of those common denominators that almost everybody knows, right?
Yep.
And so 15 students in a room, and there's 15 different kind of versions of what it's about.
Father, son, I'm sure you've heard every single version.
Sure, it's a space western. It's a used future examination of how we view, the climate change. It's a story about humans where the most human is a pair of robots. They're the up and cost, whatever. Like,
Yeah.
What I feel like Star Wars is about is this very singular idea that even little misfit me, there's that word again, even little misfit me could make a difference. That is, I believe, why Star Wars endures. And by the way, we've now told it twice.
Yeah.
We tell it through Luke, and then we tell it through Rey. But it's the same story.
Yeah.
That even little misfit lonely me might have it in me to do something gargantuan, to save the galaxy.
So let's pivot really quickly to, it's an extension of storytelling is so human at its core, and yet AI can spit out an entire movie script if you prompt it with, write me a story about a little boy who goes to the Dominican Republic, yada. You prompt it well and then say, give me a 5-minute film on that. And then you can take it into Midjourney and say, now animate this, right? Or storyboard it. How are you thinking about AI as a companion and accelerator to creativity versus a usurper or going to, dumb down our best instincts and our most creative aspects?
Well, the two words I like to think of is creative struggle. Are we robbing ourselves of the benefits of living through the creative struggle? And if I'm trying to sketch out something with, and I'm not an artist, but if I'm trying to sketch out something literally in pencil on a drawing pad, and you're looking over my shoulder too much, and it makes me nervous, because I'm in the middle of the creative struggle and I'm not there yet. Let me figure it out. We have phrases like, don't worry about how ugly it looks when you're making the sausage, like all those kind of things, right?
Sure.
We wait until, right, at some point I'll have worked through the creative struggle.
And it's go take a walk and think about it, not prompt AI a different 2 more times, right? Sit in front of your computer and just ask for more iterations of it, which I think is where people are going. It's no longer wrestle with the, pen and paper.
Yeah.
It's,
Ed Catmull's seminal book, Creativity, Inc., right, that tells the story of Pixar that became a work Bible for so many of us when that finally came out. We're like, yes, this is what we've been living. Talks about, almost every project that people look at and say, oh, yeah, that's obviously great, went through the ugly duckling phase.
That's right. Woody was too mean in Toy Story.
You should have been there and seen all the blood and sweat and tears to get it there. And we have our own war stories of the same kind of thing. So that creative struggle is what produces great art. If you want to cheat code it, and let generative AI just create something, my question is, take that logical extreme and go sell it to audiences and see how that works for you. If it's too plastic, we always can smell it a mile away. Audiences always can smell a plastic script idea or a plastic story idea or something that just isn't quite there, a cranked out sequel that was made too fast to cash in on something. We have those examples all over the place. Now, I firmly believe that AI as an accelerator tool is going to be powerful. Yeah. How many physicists or engineering professors in the late 1950s, early 60s were upset when this company called Texas Instruments brought out this thing called the calculator, right? A computer, as they used to call it, in your hands, where I could just push a button and get sine or cosine. Like, wait a second, this is the end. Our students aren't going to know how, we need to retain the slide rule. And, turns out in that case, the accelerator is fine.
Sure.
Right? I believe that especially in areas of technical code and research, AI is going to have huge advancements for us. And I'm just a layperson, but I'm reading everything else that everybody else is reading. What I would say is have a sense of where the thresholds are in your creative process, where you're using it as a crutch to skip over the creative struggle. And that's the place to not let AI, kind of just steamroll over the process. Stephen King, in his great book on writing, which I've given away countless copies of that book.
Sure.
One of the things he talks about is when you have your idea, you better write it. right? Just go. Don't edit, don't pause, don't worry about punctuation. Just write that sucker out and get it out. It might be 12 pages, it might be 26 pages, but get it out. And then put it in a drawer and leave it. For me, I have to at least sleep on an email before I'm going to send an important email.
Sure.
I really do literally have to write a rough draft, and I will sleep on it, and then get up and read it the next day, and I'm like, oh, shoot, I am so glad I didn't send that.
Yes, that's right.
It's the same thing.
No one ever says, I wish I would have sent the first draft of my email. No
I
one's
should
ever-
have said that,
it's like
right?
the
Yeah.
Dwight Eisenhower, he would write the note in anger, and then he would burn it or throw it in the trash
Exactly,
can,
yeah.
right? Because it's just good practice.
Yeah, so then, and then Stephen King says, if you can, depending on how wealthy you are for him, if you can, wait several weeks before you go and pull that document out and now read it.
Mm-hmm.
And is your idea any good at working on? Because now you can read it somewhat more objectively than just being so passionate in the middle of it. Yeah. So that to me is an example of that creative struggle process.
So now you're at Belmont. Remind me of your official
Yeah,
title.
I'm at Belmont University in Nashville, and I have this lovely role as Chief Creative Officer of the university.
At a very creative school.
Is a very gracious way of just saying, I think I get a chance to kind of float across 12 colleges on this amazing 100-acre campus, almost 9,000 undergrad and graduate students who are looking to want to go change the world. And I have enjoyed speaking on the college circuit for many years, and I've enjoyed helping create intern programs and things like that, doing master classes on an afternoon seminar, things like that. To be able to sit and be a part of a college campus now in this day and age, it has been, the last year has just been a gift. My heart goes out to Gen Z students. So if you're under 25, and this is my numbers, not some fancy person's, but if you're under 25, that to me is Gen Z, down to probably about 12, and then Gen Alpha below that. You are part of this first purely digital generation, where since you were a young child, the world engagement has two levels. It has a physical engagement with the person that might be across the table from you, and it has the digital engagement with the screen that's even closer to you. And this double track way of thinking that has completely rewired Gen Z and now Gen Alpha is so uniquely different than any generation gap we've seen, maybe since the builders to the boomers. Pre-industrial age, or kind of like early 1900s into the space age.
Horse versus car type.
All that.
It's
right. We're seeing that. We're living that. And so we can feel critical of the family at the restaurant whose every kid around the table has an iPad in front of them. Or we can say, let's understand what their felt needs are and how they're engaging differently with the world than I'm going to understand. Mm-hmm. And so I better catch up, if you will.
What do you think is most misunderstood over your past year, being even closer to students than you have been? That podcasts, academics, 140-word tweets, what do people get wrong about Gen Z, or how have you had your mind changed in the last year?
Well, I guess what I've been reminded at is that with all of our technology, and with all of our advancements, human development cycles don't change.
That's right.
And a 20-year-old is still a 20-year-old. And I am now grateful to have been the dad of 3 20-year-olds. I have 3 daughters. My daughters are all well into their 20s, and they're spread across the country now. But that is a really tender threshold, right, of moving from childhood to adulthood. And there's years of going on in that process, right? And so the opportunity, the privilege to be able to walk around and be among 18 to 23-year-olds who are looking at the world and saying, wow, am I going to have a place in that world? What's my sense of purpose?
Yep.
Where's my place of belonging? And will I make a difference? Those 3 questions, those timeless questions, I find are as pertinent today as they ever have been. And we have an opportunity to step in and help guide along the way. It's pretty awesome.
That is pretty awesome. In 5 or 10 years, to the extent that you can maybe peel back the curtain and share with us, how is Belmont different in 5 or 10 years? What is it the best in the world at, or how has it changed from what people would experience now if they were on campus?
I can say to a person, I am at Belmont University now because of the vision of Dr. Greg Jones, who's our president. And he and I met for dinner 4 years ago when he was first coming in to become the president of Belmont, over dinner in Los Angeles. And I just was struck by his vision for reimagining higher education for such a time as this. And so it is a very prescient question. And in fact, we literally have, where do we want to be by 2030? Where do you want to be by 2050? So 5 years and then 25 years. That kind of vision takes a big, getting back to, how an ability to think big. We talk about not just moonshots, but loon shots. The kind of like, let's go to the moon, but let's do the crazy version of that. My opportunity and my responsibility in that is to help try to build the ladders to the moon. And what I found, especially in coalescing different folks and across different teams, is we all have to understand the same story. When we understand the same story, then as just a person, I also need some baby steps. So the rungs on the ladder need to be pretty close together early on so we can get some early wins and start to get the momentum. Because even positive change is still friction.
Yeah. I mean, somebody said the other day, like, I'm going to butcher it, but someone's like, the vision's easy. The people are the hard part, right? It's creating that buy-in and, there's inertia and, people... What's the phrase? The two things people like are change in the way things are, right? It's just like we're all walking dichotomies, and so I imagine that's true on college campuses.
Well, that's where I keep trying to remember that it starts with me, and so as I said earlier, for me. Taking things one day at a time has never been less of a cliche. And where am I being tone deaf? Where am I wanting to come in and say an idea as opposed to coming in with a posture of listening? And over and over again, I have found that it is so much better if I can just wait and listen and then reflect back to people, that classic like reflective listening. So what I hear you saying, Zach, and all of a sudden somebody can feel heard. And then it's a little bit easier to go, okay, he's not so disruptive that I'm also not feeling heard in this situation. And that's just a kind of a moment of grace when we're talking to each other as humans.
And that's good leadership because people come in and they think I'm a disruptor and they go in there and then it's everyone else's problem that they didn't catch the vision quick enough or that they weren't on board or they don't. And it's one of those things where you can be a disruptor and you can have people who are rowing with you and championing your idea because you went about it the right way, to your point, with humility, with listening, the old cliche about the first 90 days as a CEO, right? You're listening
sure,
3 months.
Yeah.
So, okay, one more question before we wrap. If you could send a push alert, I asked this, it's kind of my take on Tim Ferriss's billboard question, which is if you could send a push alert to every American cell phone, what would you put on their home screen?
I would say, what book are you going to sit down with for 2 hours this weekend after you turn off your phone and sit down and read a book? I am a big champion for the physical experience of engaging with a story. We've been at a conference the last 3 days, and I have watched countless people when they see a slide that they think is somewhat provocative or interesting. Of course, what do? Raise their cell phone and snap a picture of that. How many times are we ever going to go back to that picture, and what is that picture doing for you?
That is a true thing. Stop recording concerts. You're not going to watch the grainy vertical video. And also, there's a chance it's going to be streamed, right? I was laughing because I was watching a Disney musical special the other day, and you have people with their phones. It's like, actually, Disney's recording it with
if you want good footage on this later,
yeah, exactly. You'll be fine.
So I'm a big believer that we have our hands for a reason, right? 2 eyes, 2 hands, and only 1 mouth. So
are you anti-Kindle then? You're not don't give me an electric version?
I'm not anti-Kindle because especially the convenience of being able to keep reading my book on a plane or somewhere else.
Yeah.
But there's something about the geography of where the words are on pages in a book that actually maps to my brain differently. Mm-hmm. This is true if you're reading the Bible and you remember, the Psalms is actually in the middle. Mm-hmm. And Genesis is on the far left. That was pre. And then New Testament is on the far right. That's post.
And thumbing through it as opposed to with a Kindle, where you have to hit a button and click a page number. It's a totally different experience.
So, auditory, visual, kinesthetic, and verbal. Those are the 4 ways that we learn content. And we use it all the time in academics, but we don't realize that's how we're absorbing content all the time. So my love language is books. I collect first edition books and rare books, and they're some of the most important things to me. And when I sit down with a favorite book of mine. And my first edition books are precious to me, but they're to be used, right? They're not to be kept behind plastic on the books, like, don't touch it.
Sure.
And I carry them around with me sometimes. So just the other day, I have one of only 5,000 copies that were ever made of T.E. Lawrence's Seven Pillars of Wisdom, the guy who they did the movie Lawrence of Arabia about. And there's a whole backstory about when he first wrote his manuscript, and then he burned it because he didn't want anybody to read it. Then he rewrote it again, and only 5,000 original copies were made. I have one of them. I had it in my backpack the other day, and I brought it to a friend's house because I knew I'd have an hour to kill, and I wanted to go back in and just kind of sit and have a little time to do that. What 2 hours this weekend are you going to turn your phone off and sit down and open a book? And if you haven't done it in a while, here's what will happen. It'll sound good, and within about the first 5 or 6 minutes, your brain will start to go, maybe something else could be happening, right? Because we have attuned ourselves. I've certainly attuned myself to that ADD of like,
That's right.
Maybe I haven't checked my phone recently, or maybe I should get up and go back and pour another cup of coffee, whatever. And so it takes time to let our brains recheck back into the geography of a book and let our heart and our soul really pour into the story that wants to come off the page.
Okay, 3 rapid fire book questions now. What book have you gifted most?
Oh, in the professional capacity, Catmull's Creativity Inc., John Cleese's Creativity, and Stephen King's book on writing. By the way, a little side note, Peggy Noonan's book on speaking called On Speaking Well is fantastic.
Great.
People say, well, I want to be a writer. You should read King's book on writing. I don't like doing public speaking. You should read Noonan's book on speaking well, because it just helps shape everything we're doing. And by the way, you're going to do that next time you're pitching an idea internally and trying to get your thing funded.
That's exactly right. That's storytelling and speaking and presentation and personal branding and all that. I'm going to read all those books now. Okay. If you House is on Fire, you can grab one of your first editions or one book period, not your Bible, because I know you're a strong man of faith. What are you grabbing?
Okay, one among many, but
no, you only get one. The House is on fire. You don't get to.
They're all many, right? And so it's our house in Pasadena. We just lived through the fires, right? And so it's a very real thing. And I did think about it. My very, very first edition.
That really kind of kills the question
of the first print run of Roald Dahl's Charlie and the Chocolate Factory. Which actually even he agreed after they did that first print run that the depiction of the Oompa Loompas was so inappropriate that even Roald Dahl, and if you read about him, you kind of know where this is going. Even he agreed, yeah, maybe we should redo that.
I don't know what this looks like, so now I gotta go find a visual.
It is so inappropriate and so of its era, right?
Yeah.
Turns out that's one of the copies that I have, and it's a really obviously one of the most precious stories of coming of age ever. So.
Man, I would love to hear you dissect that story. And then my last question was, what's the last book you've read that you really enjoyed?
Oh, that is a good question. The last book that I've read that I really enjoyed, well, I literally just was reading it, so to be technical, last Tuesday afternoon I was reading T.E. Lawrence's Seven Pillars of Wisdom. There's an amazing scene in the movie Lawrence of Arabia where he says, let's go to Aqaba. Right. And so I won't relive that movie story for you. David Lean's masterpiece. Right. A lot of people call it their favorite movie of all time. That's a real story. And so this young, weird, I'm going to use the word a third time, misfit British lieutenant, T.E. Lawrence, ends up leading a bunch of tribal warriors across what they call the Sun's Anvil. Never had been crossed in warfare before or whatever, and they do it. And they surprise the forces who are holding Aqaba from the wrong side. It's a real story. That's awesome. And his diary of it in Seven Pillars of Wisdom is gripping.
That's awesome. Okay, I'm going to give you one. I just read Demon Copperhead by Barbara Kingsolver, who I found out very late is a DePaul University grad and it won a Pulitzer. It's her take on David Copperfield, and it's a great, great book. If you haven't read it, it's about Appalachia, and it's worth reading. So I just
she is fantastic.
Oh, so of course you know her well.
And Poisonwood Bible. I can't recommend highly enough. not only for its heartfelt story, but also palindromes. She writes like paragraph-long palindromes, and it actually works because one of the characters in the book, in the story, speaks in palindromes. If you don't know what that is, it's like, Madam, I'm Adam. It reads the same both. Okay, imagine somebody figuring out how to write a palindrome that's like 4 or 5 lines long in a whole sentence.
That's unbelievable.
That alone is worth checking out.
Just a hat tip, and she won a bunch of awards
for that.
Poisonwood
Bible.
Poisonwood Bible. I was Google. I went down a Wikipedia rabbit hole on Barbara after I finished, and of course, I saw that, and she's a fascinating person, and obviously so gifted when you meet somebody. You are one of those gifted people, Rick. Thank you so much for your generous presence here and your time. If you like the episode, like, follow, subscribe, share, give it 5 stars, all that good stuff. Now, I'll get to the point and let you get back to your day. We'll see you next episode.